Shalom everybody, and greetings VFI News supporters and anyone else watching this video. This is an emergency update on the situation this week. We're marking the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th, 2023 massacre this week. And we're also celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles. The end of this war is coming into view as negotiations have begun in Sharm El-Sheikh, Egypt, somewhere where I once scuba dived and enjoyed it thoroughly, bringing together teams from Israel and Hamas to hash out the final details of an agreement based on the 21-point plan put forward by U.S. President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, there was drama on the high seas this past week as Greta Thunberg and her friends got stopped on their way to Gaza by the Israeli Navy, arrested and deported. This soap opera is getting kind of boring for most of us, but there must be a few people who still enjoy it because yet another flotilla is already on its way. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Well, friends, the talks in Sharm El-Sheikh, which is a wonderful town that I wish I could visit more often, by the way, began on Monday with teams from Israel and Hamas arriving and beginning preliminary work. This is a positive step, as everyone understands that if these talks are successful, it means that Israel's remaining living hostages could be home in time to celebrate at least the last few days of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. It would also mean the bloodshed in Gaza would finally end and the long-suffering residents of the Strip could get a chance to recover somewhat from their ordeal. That would include the flow of humanitarian aid to them becoming much more consistent and safe, while many wounded and hurting people could get the treatment they need. Now, Israel needs this war to end too, for all kinds of reasons. Our economy is in very bad shape, with many people out of work, especially in the tourism industry. The IDF itself is also tired after being mobilized for 2 years. If this war ends, the IDF could release tens of thousands of reservists and begin to repair, refit, restock, reorganize, and whatever else they need to do. The IDF was never meant to be mobilized for more than a few weeks or months at a time to fight very intense wars that beat back the threats to Israel and restore security quickly. Now, this current war, which started 2 years ago this week on October 7, 2023, has pushed the IDF far beyond the limits of what it is designed to do. Many of the threats that have been hanging over Israel's head for a long time have been dealt with in this war, and that's all to the good. But the fact that remains that the IDF is just simply tired, not exhausted, but tired, and it needs a break and it needs support, kind of the rest of the Israeli society does as well. So I'll talk about that more in a moment, but for now, it's enough for you to understand that the end of this war will be a very good thing for everyone except, of course, Iran, which is the big loser in this conflict. Now let's look at what's right in front of us, the talks in Sharm El-Sheikh, which were expected to shift into high gear on Tuesday with the arrival of Israel's Minister for Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, as well as U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Now, many of you probably haven't heard what the actual 21 points are in the 21-point plan that President Trump, which have been fully accepted by Israel and the partially acceptance by Hamas, has happened so far. The talks in Egypt are meant to iron out the differences, and Hamas has very little leverage to make demands at this point. But of course, they're going to try. In any case, here are the 21 points. First, the IDF must cease all offensive operations and only act in self-defense if attacked. This condition has already been met by Israel, even before Hamas formally agreed to negotiations. Next, the Gaza Strip will become a demilitarized area free of terror that will not constitute a threat to its neighbors. It will also be redeveloped for the benefit of its residents who have suffered enough. Fourth, if both sides agree to the proposal, the war will end immediately. IDF forces will withdraw to an agreed line in order to prepare for the release of the hostages. Now, during this period, all military actions will cease, including aerial and artillery bombings, and the lines of fighting will be frozen until the conditions are met for a gradual and full withdrawal. Within 72 hours from the moment Israel publicly declares acceptance of the agreement, all the living hostages will be released, although Hamas says it might take some time for the remains of hostages who died in captivity to be found, collected, and returned. Sadly, I can believe this last part, as some of the hostages died months ago or even longer, and their remains were buried in a shallow grave somewhere or simply left in a tunnel under a building that was later destroyed in the fighting. In a war, chaos and confusion are often the only consistent themes, and so when Hamas says they lost track of some of these remains, it is likely that just this once they're telling the truth, if they are at all. Now, moving on to the sixth point in the plan, after the release of all the hostages, Israel will release security prisoners, including 250 serving life sentences for very serious crimes, and I'm very sad about this part. Hamas is reportedly demanding that these include some of the very worst of the worst, most dangerous terrorist leaders who have been in prison for a long time, but not long enough. This includes Marwan Barghouti, who has been in prison for 23 years, has learned to speak, read, and write Hebrew while in prison. He has also managed to become the most popular choice on the Palestinian street to succeed Mahmoud Abbas as the next leader of the Palestinian Authority. Now I'm going to switch to commentary mode for a moment and say something which might shock some and probably get me some pushback, but here it is. It might not be a bad idea for Israel to release Marwan Barghouti at this time. Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, is almost 90 years old and in poor health. He's not going to be in the picture much longer, and someone's going to have to replace him. Now, Barghouti is probably the only figure with enough credibility on the Palestinian street to do it. And as awful as it would be to have this murderous, ugly terrorist in charge of the PA, the other option is for the PA to fall apart, and then we'll have complete anarchy in the West Bank, which would be much worse from Israel's perspective. Now, Israel is already having to devote considerable resources to helping the PA manage the problems it already has, particularly in Jenin and Tulkarem north of Jerusalem. But again, Marwan Barghouti has lots of blood on his hands, and the worst that can happen to him is that he will die in the next bombardment against the Palestinian Authority should they turn to suicide terrorism and other forms of terrorism. This world is deeply imperfect and messy, and there are seldom good choices. It's much more common for there to be a bunch of lousy options, and you just have to pick the one that you think you have the best chance of managing the fallout from it. This is one such situation, for better or for worse. Now, getting back to the 21 points, Hamas is also demanding the release of 1,700 Gazan residents who were arrested after October 7, 2023. That includes some who are suspected of having taken part in the massacre, so that could be very problematic. 7. After the release of all the hostages, Hamas members who commit to coexistence and peace will be given the option to lay down their arms and receive amnesty. Whoever wishes to leave the Gaza Strip will be granted the option of safe passage to receiving countries. I hope they're a long way away from us. Following this step, large shipments of aid will immediately flow to the Gaza Strip. Water, electricity, and sewage infrastructure will begin to be repaired, as well as hospitals, bakeries, etc. The distribution of this aid will be done by the UN. Can you believe it? With the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation being essentially kicked out. Everyone knows that the GHF was doing a great job, which was very embarrassing to the UN, which failed repeatedly and is accused of open collaboration with Hamas. I guess the UN managed to convince President Trump it was more important to keep them happy than to actually get the job done. We'll see if they can do better going forward, but I'm not holding my breath. Next, the Gaza Strip will be managed temporarily by a Palestinian technocratic and an apolitical committee that will provide daily services and operate under the oversight of a new transitional international body called the Peace Council. Shalom, everybody. Headed by President Donald Trump. That's good. Along with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. That last detail is very strange to me, but whatever. This Peace Council will be in charge until the PA is prepared to come in and manage the situation, which will probably take a very long time. On that note, the next point is that a special economic zone will also be established with preferential tariffs and access arrangements to be set with participating countries. 12th on the list of points is that no one will be required to leave Gaza. That's a shame. But anyone who wants to will be able to exit and return. Next, Hamas and other factions will commit not to participate in any way in the administration of Gaza. All terror infrastructures will be destroyed and not be rebuilt, and the demilitarization process will be managed under international supervision. In this context, regional partners will provide guarantees for Hamas and the factions' compliance with their commitments and to ensure that the new Gaza Strip will not constitute a threat. Also, the 15th point says that the United States will work with Arab and international partners to establish a temporary international stabilization force to be called ISF, which will immediately enter the Gaza Strip. Now, the force will train and support Palestinian police forces and will coordinate its activity with Jordan and Egypt to secure the borders and prevent weapons smuggling while arranging the safe passage of goods, if you can believe that will happen. Next, Israel commits to not occupy or annex Gaza. As the international force establishes control and stability, the IDF will withdraw according to milestones and conditions to be set between the IDF, the international force, Arab states, and the United States, under full handover of the Gaza Strip to them. Only a peripheral security presence will be maintained until it is completely ensured that there is no more terror threat from the Gaza Strip. So if Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the arrangement and aid will continue in terror-free areas that are transferred from IDF control to the international force. Next, and to my mind, this one is a bit of a joke, but the 18th point is that an interfaith dialogue process will begin on values of tolerance and partnership to change narratives among Palestinians and Israelis to emphasize the benefits of peace. Shalom. 19th on this list is that as Gaza's development progresses and the Palestinian Authority reform is implemented, conditions will be created for a credible path to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. And 20th, the United States will hold a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for coexistence of peace and prosperity, and they shall live happily ever after. Now, the 21st point has not been publicly released, and everyone is wondering what it is. So am I. It seems obvious to me that this mystery 21st point is that Israel will commit to not annexing Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. Now, I'm sure many in Israel and many Christian supporters of this country will be very upset by this, but I actually don't think that's necessary, because if you look at all the points on this list, many of them are likely to be temporary, and probably they'll be quietly dropped and forgotten at some point as circumstances change. There's no reason to think that this mystery 21st point, if it is an Israeli commitment not to annex Judea and Samaria, or if it's something else, will become eternally set in stone either. Now, there's one thing I am quite sure of, and that's the fact that even if these negotiations are successful and the war ends this week or maybe early next week, the people of Israel are going to need a lot of help recovering from this war. The economy will likely see some bounce back when peace is formally announced, and if the Abraham Accords proceed as they were on track to before the war started, that will even be better. But that's all in the medium to long-term future, and there are thousands of families in Israel in financial distress right now. That's why Vision for Israel is working harder than we've ever worked before to support these families and communities. So please watch this short video about how you can be part of the solution.
When we go out to the distributions, we just are enjoying to see the people when they come to us and they are so grateful. It's one thing to look at lists of names and all the people coming, but when we see them and when they come and when they sit there and then they meet us, we get to talk to them. We get to learn about their families and their needs beyond what we're giving them. That is the greatest expression of our faith in God and who Yeshua is for us, because if it wasn't for him being the provider for this organization, we wouldn't have what we have to give out. And the greatest of this is to give it with love. And that is our logo. That is our motto, to do it joyfully, to do it with love. We always like when we come together, the staff, make sure that when you go, you're cheering them up. It's not just the giving of the voucher, it's the giving of the spirit, to lift them up spiritually, to let them know that there are people behind them, that the support that we give is not just money, but it's much more than that. And that is our prayer, is for the spiritual and the physical restoration for our people.
Welcome back, friends. Now, we're more than halfway through the report and we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I'll just say that these negotiations, which started on Monday, will not be allowed to drag on for very long. They are ongoing, and if there's a breakthrough, we might do a special report later in the week. But for now, we need to take a look at some of the other big stories coming out of Israel this week, starting with the latest flotilla of futility, headlined by Swedish outrage activist Greta Thunberg. Well, the so-called global Sumud flotilla was intercepted off the coast of Gaza on Thursday morning, which was Yom Kippur. All 42 boats were boarded without violence or major incident, and the boats were towed to Ashdod port, where the 500 or so activists and crew members were taken into custody and prepared to be deported. Now, 137 of them sheepishly got on the Turkish Airlines flight to Istanbul on Saturday afternoon, and in the next few days, more and more of them did the same. But some decided that they kind of liked being able to claim that Israel had kidnapped them and were holding them against their will. Oh, you deceived people out there. So despite the obvious fact that Israel just wanted to get rid of them as quickly as possible, they took legal action meant to challenge Israel's authority in doing what it has done. This prolonged their stay in an Israeli prison cell, wasting everyone's time and creating drama whose only purpose is to boost their social media presence, which is all most of them care about anyway. Spoiled kids. Now, with all that having been said, we need to go over some other material regarding this flotilla. We'll start with a claim that Greta Thunberg and other members of the leadership repeated over and over again was that they were taking matters into their own hands because of the governments of the world had failed to bring humanitarian aid to these poor people in Gaza. That is a blatant lie, and I'm pretty sure Greta and the others knew it. Millions of tons of humanitarian aid have been sent into the Strip over the past 2 years. Most of it has been sent in by truck. Some has been airdropped, and there was also an effort to deliver aid from the sea. Now, after it got there, the UN was supposed to deliver it to the people who needed it, and that was where the plan kind of broke down. The United Nothings was often incompetent and occasionally worked closely with Hamas in order to allow this internationally recognized terrorist organization to steal most of the aid and use it for its own purposes. But nonetheless, aid was delivered. None of this was of any interest to the activists on this futile flotilla. And last Tuesday, the IDF published documents which might explain why. It turns out several of the boats in the flotilla are owned by a shell company in Spain, which is controlled by a man who is active in an organization that has close ties to Hamas. In this context, it's important to point out that Hamas is the franchise of the Muslim Brotherhood organization in the Palestinian territories. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood has many branches and closely related groups in countries all over the world. It should surprise no one that an affiliated group in Spain is working to support this flotilla, whose only purpose was to be a provocation meant to embarrass Israel and support the Hamas narrative that there is starvation in the Strip that is all Israel's fault. But when the Israeli security forces boarded these boats, they found the cargo holds empty. There was no humanitarian aid on board. As an Israeli police officer who made a brief video from the hold of one of the boats commented, this probably explains why the flotilla organizers refused offers by the Greek and Italian governments to unload the humanitarian aid in Cyprus so it could be transferred to Gaza through the usual channels. Well, that plan also had support from the Vatican, just by the way. But they simply did not have any aid to transfer. And this flotilla was never about delivering aid. Rather, it was just about making a big fuss so they could make videos for social media like the lame nonsense Greta posted about being kidnapped and mistreated. Are you surprised by any of this? Take that girl out of here, just get her and put her somewhere in a little class making pottery. Several government officials in France, Italy, and other countries voiced their disgust at the blatant hypocrisy and childish theatrics of these activists. Apparently, there are still some responsible adults around who are running out of patience. May their tribe increase. Anyways, there have been massive demonstrations on behalf of Greta. How fooled are you out there? Have you ever asked yourself, do you check the facts? However, it is my sad duty to inform you that the Israeli Navy will have more work to do in the coming days as a smaller flotilla of 9 boats is reportedly on its way to the waters off Gaza and will likely need to be intercepted by the end of the week. The summer is almost over and the Mediterranean is quickly becoming unsafe for small boats. I'm warning you out there to be out in the open water, so there might be some relief from this silliness, and that's a good point to be praying into. Another point of prayer is the ongoing threat of ballistic missiles, drones, and rockets being fired at Israel by the Houthis in Yemen, who are ignoring the growing famine and disease epidemics among the Yemeni people. They say they're governing and devoting all their efforts to attacking Israel. Well, early Sunday morning, Israelis were once again awakened, as well as myself, to the sound of the air raid sirens as one of our staff members made it out onto his porch just in time to see the Houthi missile being intercepted in the skies over the Dead Sea region. Several drones fired by the Houthis also triggered sirens when they approached the Red Sea resort city of Eilat again this week. Also, we never forget that to the north, Hezbollah is busy trying to rebuild its arsenal of rockets and missiles because despite the spectacular defeat they suffered last fall, they have not given up on their dream of once again attacking Israel in the future. Because of all this, here at Vision for Israel, we are continuing with our project to place portable bomb safety shelters weighing 30 tons each in Israeli communities. So please watch this short video about this still very important project. After October 7, 2023, which was considered the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, security teams were devastated along the southern border of Israel. From October 8th onwards, also Hezbollah in Lebanon, a terror group, also attacked in the northern part of Israel. Security teams turned to Vision for Israel for extra aid and help, and many of the items that we provided were ceramic vests for security teams to avoid bullet wounds as well as shrapnel wounds. We also needed to provide proper helmets. Most of these security teams had outdated equipment that hadn't been replaced in decades. In addition to that, there was a request for medic bags and defibrillators and for all sorts of medical disposables that were needed. Then as a result of these rocket attacks, also fires were erupting, and so we were requested to provide firefighting equipment and generators and protective clothing in order to put out these fires. And so Vision for Israel is very happy to come alongside the civilian security teams, the community security teams. We even bought a new police vehicle for one of the southern cities and dedicated it together with the mayor. It was in the city of Sderot, which was badly hit during the first days of the war. And the requests keep coming in, and we will continue to keep providing. Now we're almost out of time for this week's report, but I want to continue the tradition of ending with some good news. And this week it's an easy choice because we're in the midst of celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, a feast which is commanded in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 34. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days to the Lord. Now, a lesser-known commandment regarding this feast is also recorded in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 16. And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This is a prophecy about a future in which the nations of the world will come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, along with the Jewish people. But as some of you probably know, there are quite a large number of Christians from dozens of nations all over the world who have been coming to Jerusalem every year to celebrate the feast since 1979. In fact, Bati and I led the Hebrew worship for one of these big conferences that were held in Jerusalem and still are. That very first Christian Feast of Tabernacles was at Christ Church, the Anglican chapel in Jerusalem's Old City, which was the first Protestant church in the entire Middle East. There were about 1,000 people there, and my mentor, Derek Prince, was among the speakers. Well, since then, the event has grown to a worldwide phenomenon and has stood the test of time, people celebrating it all over the world, in fact. In recent years, it's become bigger online as the pandemic and war has prevented many people from physically being here in Jerusalem. But even so, this year, I am informed that around 2,500 Christian pilgrims are in Jerusalem attending various events to mark this important biblical feast. So I hope next year, if there is no war, please God, no pandemic, we'll be back to the range of 5,000 to 7,000 pilgrims we hosted in the years long before 2020. So on that note, I want to wish all of our viewers Chag Sukkot, Chag Sameach. I hope wherever you are, you're able to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles this week, and we're looking forward to cooler weather and more holidays in the months ahead. So if anyone wants to make me some pumpkin pie or whip up a glass of eggnog for me, my feelings won't be hurt one bit at all. I'm Barry Segal, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom, shalom.